Your brother needs it more than you do, Anna, my mother said, avoiding my eyes as she slid the papers across the table. He has 3 kids. You're single, successful. You understand, right? I sat silently at the kitchen table of my childhood home, staring down at the documents. They gave Michael full ownership of Grandma's house, the house she had specifically left to me in her will. A beautiful Victorian sitting on 5 acres of land passed down through generations. Mom, I said, keeping my voice even, Grandma left that house to me for a reason. She knew. She absolutely knew. Don't start, my father cut in, entering with his reading glasses. Your grandmother wasn't thinking clearly at the end. Michael needs this more. His kids need a place to grow up. What would you do, live there alone? I considered telling them then. About how Grandma and I had spent her final year planning everything. The land surveys. The legal paperwork. The trust. But looking at their dismissive faces, I decided to wait. Michael's been struggling since the divorce, my mother continued, arranging cookies like we were discussing the weather instead of handing away my inheritance. This will help him get back on his feet. Course. Michael's eternal struggles. Never mind that the divorce came after he cheated with his wife's yoga instructor. Or that his financial mess stemmed from gambling and failed business schemes. Somehow I was always expected to step aside. To sacrifice. To understand. Have you already given him the keys? I asked, watching her reaction. She hesitated. Embarrassed. He moved in yesterday. We didn't want to bother you at work. Course not. They never bothered me when they were making decisions about my life. I stood smoothing my skirt. Well, I hope you're ready for what comes next. My father's head jerked up. Is that a threat? Smiled. No, Dad. Just an observation. I have a meeting with my lawyer this afternoon. My mother's voice sharpened. Anna, don't be difficult. This is about family. Exactly, I said. About how Grandma trusted me to protect hers. And with that, I left them in the kitchen. Mom still holding her tray of cookies, Dad's face turning that familiar shade of red when anyone dared challenge him. Driving to my lawyer's office, I thought about my last real conversation with Grandma, 6 months before she passed. Sharp as ever, seated in her favorite armchair. Her blue eyes steady as she walked me through the documents. They'll try to change it, she had warned. Your parents always favored Michael, even when it hurt him. That's why I'm leaving you the house. You're the only one who sees what the land is really for. And she was right. What they didn't know, what Michael didn't know, was that Grandma had already transferred ownership of the land to me 3 years ago. The house was in her name, yes. But the land, that was mine. She knew about the development plans, the nature preserve we had envisioned, the legacy we wanted to protect. Mr. Patterson, my lawyer, greeted me as I walked into his office. I assume they made their move, he asked, gesturing for me to sit. I handed him the papers. They gave him the house. He's already moved in. He skimmed the documents, brows lifting. No consultation with the executor. That's bold. They've never been good at reading the fine print, I replied, placing my own folder on his desk. Inside, the land deed, the conservation easement, and every legal detail Grandma and I had meticulously prepared. Shall we proceed? He asked, a hint of a smile. He nodded. Somewhere, Michael was probably already dreaming up open-concept renovations, completely unaware that the land he stood on was now legally protected, and completely out of his control. Yes, I said. It's time they learned some things are bigger than their family favoritism. Grandma had a vision, and I intend to honor it. Mr. Patterson quietly prepared the official notices as I stood by his office window, gazing out at the city but picturing something far more important, a thriving nature preserve where Grandma's meadow once swayed gently in the breeze. 5 untouched acres, now protected forever. Michael could keep the house. But he was about to learn the hard way. Owning a house doesn't mean you control the land beneath it. The next morning my phone buzzed. 6 times before I finally answered. What the hell is this? Michael's voice crackled with fury. Some lawyer says I need permission to make changes. That I can't build the pool the kids want. I leaned back in my office chair, enjoying the view from my high-rise. That's the conservation easement notice, I said calmly. The land is protected now. No construction, no major landscaping. It's officially part of the Valley Grove Nature Preserve. But the house is mine, he snapped. Mom and Dad gave it to me. The house. But the land. That's been mine for 3 years. Grandma transferred it to me long before she passed. You're free to live there, Michael, but you'll have to follow the preservation guidelines. There was a long pause on the line, then sputtering. You can't do this. I already promised the kids a pool. I was planning a game room extension. Then maybe you should have checked the property records before making promises, I replied, voice even. The easement is legally binding. Any construction would violate state environmental laws. Just then, my assistant appeared in the doorway, gesturing that my next meeting was ready. Look, Michael, I have to go. The Preservation Society will be sending someone next week to mark the protected zones. Try not to disturb the old-growth trees. They're protected under the agreement. I ended the call mid-protest. Minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was my mother. Anna Catherine Miller, she began, using my full name like I was still 10. What is this nonsense about protected land? Your brother is devastated. It's not nonsense, Mom. It's a legally binding conservation easement. Grandma and I planned it together. The land will be preserved permanently to protect the watershed and wildlife. But what about the children? She cried. They need space to play. They have space. They just can't pave over it. Maybe they'll learn something about ecology instead. The Preservation Society has great youth programs. Then came my father's voice, sharp and commanding. Now listen here, young lady. We can fight this in court. You're just being spiteful. Spiteful, echoed. Because you gave away my inheritance behind my back? Because you've always favored Michael? Or because you never took the time to understand the values Grandma and I shared? Legacy, he scoffed. It's just land. No. It's habitat for endangered species. It's part of the valley's last natural watershed. It's not just land. Grandma understood that. That's why she entrusted it to me. I heard them bickering in the background, voices rising and falling, passing the phone like a hot coal. Finally, my mother returned. We're coming over. We'll discuss this in person. There's nothing to discuss, I said, glancing at the clock. The easement is filed with the state. It's permanent. But tell the kids I love them. Maybe suggest they apply for the Junior Naturalist program. The society offers scholarships. I hung up and exhaled deeply. My assistant poked her head in. Parents still processing the news? She asked with a grin. You could say that, I said. The preservation team's here. Ready to start the surveys. Should I send them in? I stood and straightened my jacket. Yes. It's time to build what Grandma always envisioned. As I entered the conference room, I thought of Grandma's voice during our last conversation. The land remembers, Anna, she had said, watching the golden light stretch across her meadow. It remembers every promise we make to it. Make sure you keep ours. The preservation team unfurled their maps, marking out native species habitats, wetland zones, historic trees. Everything Grandma had taught me to see, to protect. Let them have the house. Let them fill it with complaints and missed opportunities. The real inheritance wasn't the building. It was the responsibility. Michael would either learn to live with the land, or leave it behind. Either way, the land was protected, just as Grandma had wanted. My phone buzzed again. Text from Michael. Mom and Dad are furious. You've really done it this time. I smiled and typed back. Actually, Grandma did it. I'm just keeping her promise. Then I turned back to the preservation plans, ready to honor the legacy that truly mattered. 3 months later, I stood at the edge of what was now officially the Valley Grove Nature Preserve, watching volunteers from the Preservation Society install educational signs along the freshly marked trail. Autumn had painted the landscape in blazing reds and golds, just as Grandma had always described her favorite season. "Ms. Miller." A small voice piped up beside me. A girl maybe 12 holding a notebook. "I'm Katie, Michael's oldest. Are you really my aunt?" I smiled, instantly recognizing my brother's eyes in her face. "I am. It's nice to finally meet you properly. Dad's been really mad," she said frankly. "But I kind of love what you're doing here. We saw deer behind the house yesterday. And my science teacher said this is one of the most important wildlife corridors in the valley." Before I could reply, Michael appeared behind her, looking awkward in the crisp morning air. "Katie, go help your siblings with their worksheets," he said gently. She nodded and ran off. Michael cleared his throat. "The kids joined that junior naturalist program you mentioned. They're really into it." I nodded, waiting. He had barely spoken to me since the easement notice. Our parents had been cold and distant at every family gathering. "Listen," he began, scuffing his shoe against the gravel like he used to when he was forced to apologize as a kid. "I've been thinking about what Grandma used to say, how she knew every tree, every bird. She really loved this place." "She did," I said quietly. "And she wanted to make sure it stayed the way she remembered it." He looked around at the preserve volunteers nearby. "The kids keep telling me things, facts about ecosystems, species I've never even heard of. Did you know there's a butterfly that only lives in this valley? The silver-spotted azure." Smiled. "Grandma used to show me their chrysalises on the old oak trees." Michael paused. "Mom and Dad still talk about lawyers, about fighting the easement. But watching the kids get excited about this, maybe you and Grandma were right." It wasn't quite an apology, but coming from Michael it was close. "The house is still yours," I reminded him. "You can make it a home. Just respect the land it sits on," he finished. "Yeah, I'm starting to get that." That afternoon, I was surprised to see my parents' car pull up the gravel drive. They stepped out slowly, taking in the restoration work around them with unreadable expressions. "We went to the county records office," my mother said without greeting. "We read everything, the easement, the land transfer. We had no idea Grandma planned this with you for years. All those times we thought you were just keeping her company," my father added. "We were planning a legacy," I said simply. "One that would benefit everyone, especially your grandchildren." They looked over to where Katie and her siblings were proudly showing a volunteer their wildlife observation journals. "They do seem invested," my mother admitted, her voice softening. "Michael said the kids are learning about ecosystems in school," my father added. His youngest gave a whole presentation on water conservation. I couldn't help smiling. Grandma would have loved that. She always said children instinctively know what adults forget, that we're supposed to protect beautiful things, not just use them. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "She did say that. I just never really listened." "None of us did," my father said quietly. "Except you." We stood there in the autumn sunlight, watching the preserve come to life. Educational signs, marked trails, protected zones where wildlife could thrive. "We were wrong," my mother finally said. "About the house. About not including you. You just assumed," I replied gently. "Like always, that Michael's needs came first." "But Grandma knew exactly what she was doing when she chose you," my father said. "This wasn't just about a house." "No," I said. "It was about protecting something precious." He nodded. "Your grandmother would be proud, Anna. You've made her dream real." As if on cue, 2 deer emerged from the woods and stepped into the open meadow. Katie and her siblings froze, eyes wide with wonder, their journals forgotten in their hands. I watched them, heart full. "Yes," I whispered. "This is exactly what she wanted." The preserve would stand not as a monument to conflict, but as a living memory of Grandma's values. A legacy of foresight, wisdom, and quiet courage. Sometimes, the best form of justice isn't revenge. It's proving that you understood something sacred all along, and then protecting it even when no one else would.